I want you all to do me a favor. This is kind of an idea that I've been workshopping and thinking about for a while. I need you all to tell me if I'm full of shit, because I submitted it to RSA, and I'd rather my friends tell me that than get up in front of RSA and have everybody at RSA tell me that. So we're going to talk a little bit about the de-RaaS'ing of ransomware. Think of it like de-GAUSing your computer, but we don't do that anymore. So this is me. I've written 2 books about ransomware. Obviously, they haven't taken since we still have a ransomware problem. So maybe don't buy those, buy something else instead. I'm going to start by asking a question that I get asked every time I go to talk to somebody. Are the number of ransomware attacks up or down this year? So raise your hand if you think they're up. Great. Raise your hand if you think they're down. And then everyone be honest and say, we don't actually fucking know. There we go. Yeah, that's the right answer. So this is what Recorded Future has pulled from extortion sites through October 31st, of this year. Obviously, we all know ransomware extortion sites are not really a good measure of the number of ransomware attacks, but at least it's a number we can all kind of agree on, even though everybody's going to be plus or minus 20 or so, depending on when you catch it, when they go offline, and blah, blah, blah. So according to that, ransomware attacks are down. When I pulled these numbers at the end of September, they were up. So, it's just been one of those years. What I think is much more interesting is in 2021, in all of 2021, when we pulled things from extortion sites, we were pulling from 44 different extortion sites throughout the whole year. Just through the end of October, 113 different extortion sites. So 100 fewer attacks, but whatever, I don't do math, so whatever 113 minus 44 is, that many more extortion sites that we're pulling from. This year, through the end of October, we've also tracked 223 new ransomware variants. And I want to be very clear, most of this is actually stolen code or, rebranded Stop Deja Vu. So I'm not saying that 223 people have gone out and made brand new ransomware variants. But these are never seen, never reported ransomware variants compared to 183 in all of 2021. So some other things that we're seeing so far this year, healthcare attacks are down, local government attacks are down, school attacks down-ish, but they may wind up overtaking last year. National government attacks way, 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 way up because there were almost none of those in the previous few years. Now they happen almost every week. Attacks on construction, and then a big area of growth that we're seeing for us, what we would consider small business attacks, and we consider them small business because they don't have enough money to pay any of the companies that are here to actually help them. So looking at real estate offices, dentist offices, car dealerships, those attacks we see are significantly increasing. So again, what we consider small business, but often in their communities, they're the largest employer. That is a weird phenomenon where we're seeing ransomware actors go way up, where they take out the whole government of Costa Rica, but then also take out your local car dealership. We're also seeing ransomware go global. So we're seeing a lot more what we think are nation-state-backed ransomware. So whether you're talking Iran, China, North Korea, Russia. Thanks for releasing that yesterday, Microsoft. Made my map much more symmetrical. So, I'm already halfway through my presentation, and I haven't really gotten to my point. So I do actually have one of those. What I think that we're seeing, I say we because I try and tend to speak for Recorded Future, and then Christopher tells me not to do that. What I think all of this data shows is that we're starting to see ransomware groups are rejecting the RaaS model and either going it alone, or if they're adopting the RaaS model, they've got a side hustle of, I also have my own ransomware. So maybe sometimes I deploy Lockbit, but sometimes I deploy my own ransomware. And we look at that, if we look at the chart, for the top chart on the right, in 2021, you had Conti as like the clear leader in terms of extortion sites. But then there were a few other that were like in close second, third place. And then in 2022, what we're seeing Lockbit and then a whole bunch of really also rans. Very few that are cracking even 100 victims on their extortion site, none that have gotten over 200 victims. So we're seeing this movement away, this kind of either centralization to Lockbit or moving away from that entirely. And then, of course, Zach, I don't think you're here today, are you? Well, Zach, thank you for tweeting that for me. So yesterday we saw the first member of Lockbit get arrested, and I think something really interesting in the indictment is that DOJ and Europol and everybody else have been investigating Lockbit for 2.5 years, so we think there's going to be a lot more. If there's anybody from the FBI that would like to comment on that here, we'd love to hear your thoughts. No? Okay. So we do think there's going to be a lot more, so it's going to be like, yeah, I know some people are talking about Royal as sort of the next Lockbit, but they're still kind of, they're all the way on the right where they've got a little teeny tiny bump, but they're still kind of way down there. So what it looks like is that a lot of the affiliates are skittish about being part of the RaaS model, because think of what happens when you become a very successful RaaS. You have law enforcement going after you. You have other hackers going after you. You have Ukrainian researchers get really pissed off at you. And again, with Lockbit, you see this takedown. So as we've seen with the ransomware task force that have started up between governments, there's a lot of attention being paid to ransomware groups. And so, being part of a large RaaS group may be dangerous to your health going forward if you want to avoid jail. So we do think that many of these new ransomware groups, these smaller 4 or 5 person groups, don't want to be part of a RaaS. Instead, they want to be kind of their own small group and hopefully avoid detection and avoid drawing a lot of attention to themselves. And one of the things I did not put that slide in. One of the things that we're seeing is that one of when we talk about new ransomware groups, we're not really talking about anybody developing new ransomware. We're talking about people using stolen code. So, with the Lockbit code out there, with the Conti code out there, with the Revil code out there, Chaos code's been out there forever. A lot of these, what we call new groups, are just using stolen code. And so they're saying, well, yes, I could pay the RaaS operator and be part of their group, or I could just use their code and be my own ransomware and going off and doing that. So we do think that there's a lot of that going on. So A, they don't want the attention of being part of a large RaaS group, but also I want to keep my own money. And the nice thing is, over the last couple of years, this whole ransomware ecosystem's built up. And we've talked about them all today. We've talked about the information stealers. We've talked about the initial access brokers. We've talked about all of the services that you can basically buy. So if I want to go and start my own ransomware, all I need to do is buy services from all these different people, and I don't need to be part of a RaaS movement to go and do that. So we have the problem of these new ransomware groups that are not being part of RaaS, that want to be small and basically very flexible. I mean, we've seen a couple of cases where we've had anecdotally, and I don't know how widespread this is, anecdotally where we've seen some of these groups where they'll get into trouble with a victim because they have a decryptor that just doesn't work. So they're given a decryptor, the decryptor doesn't work, and what the ransomware group does is they shut down their onion site, start up a new onion site, switch from Lockbit to Conti or something like that. They don't need to keep operating. Whereas with the other ransomware groups that were out there, with the larger RaaS groups, you always had you always had access to developers and things like that, and there was usually, although not always, because ransomware actors are just assholes sometimes, you would try and actually come up with a working decryptor because that was part of your reputation. But these new groups, because they can come and go so quickly, they don't necessarily need to worry about their reputation. So there really is no downside for these new ransomware actors to engage in this activity, run their own service, and still be part of a larger RAS group. If they feel like, okay, this isn't working, great, I'll go back to whatever RAS group I want to use, or just jump from one strain to another. And so again, we're not seeing a lot of new code out there. It's all a lot of code reuse. But the good news is for defenders, we're also not seeing a lot of new techniques from some of these groups. I know Royal does the email thread phishing attacks, but for the most part, we're not seeing anything really new. So a lot of Cobalt Strike, AdFind, Mimikatz, Bloodhound, PowerShell. So same detections work. The problem becomes, and Lizzie, you probably know a lot more about this than I do, when you're actually trying to identify who you're negotiating with. If for some reason you have to pay or you want to just talk to them to find out the scope of the problem, if it's like, oh, well, this identifies as, Conti, but it's clearly not Conti behind it. So who are we actually talking to? What are we talking to? So again, in addition to law enforcement on the negotiation side, it appears to be a much bigger problem. And I'm glad you're nodding your head, so thank you. I do think that, being in touch with law enforcement is usually, in general, a good idea. So I highly recommend that if you can, especially if you're dealing with a new ransomware, because you never know when you're talking to North Korea, since North Korea is actually trying to make money off their ransomware and things like that. But broadly speaking, I do think that what we're seeing is we're seeing a decrease in the RAS model. It's still dominant out there, so this is not, oh, hey, there's no more RAS. I wish that were the case. But I do think that going forward, we're going to see less and less in that, especially as these larger RAS groups continue to fall. And I hope they continue to fall because I hate them all. So that was it. Again, I want to thank you all very much. I really appreciate everybody's time. And feel free to come and tell me how wrong I am after. I'd love to hear it. So thank you all.